Hi, this is Eva again, and it's a Little Dove production. I got that print at, there's like a shop here that called the Beat Angel, and they have original prints and also, stones and gemstones and sage and all that. Like an alternative used book area that's got a lot of stuff on spiritual aspects. So we were talking about schizophrenia. I was discussing when my mom used to go for extremely long walks, like sometimes 5 miles a day, just to get, I don't know, some kind of dopamine, serotonin reaction, so that I guess it calmed her on some level to be able to do that. And she also took the bus. She was oddly very, very good about taking the bus. There was never any incidents on the bus at all that I ever heard of. And she would wander everywhere for hours and hours and hours. It was something that, like I said, just must have brought some kind of mental relief to her. And they have shown in studies that exercise is something that does help people with mental illness sort of take the edge off their feelings, because they can be extremely intense. They actually have something nowadays that I wish they could have, like in schools or something. I think it's the most incredible thing I've ever seen. It's like a futuristic, what do they call those things that people, I know, like, I can't remember the word, but they're like reality. This is Rocco. They're like, they you can see things in the future. I mean, you can see things like they can make video games where it's like right in your face, like you can see the worlds and everything. I can't remember the word, but simulator or something. But they have one I saw, and I think it was 60 Minutes, and it actually, you can wear it and it will show you, I mean, only like scientists and geeks like me would be like so into this, but it'll show you the things that, like, the visual images that somebody with a schizophrenia sees, like how things like are coming to them and talking to them, like everything that's sort of coming at them, and how, like, there's many painters who have done representations. Salvador Dali was one of them. I mean, there's quite a few. Van Gogh had schizophrenia. I don't necessarily know that any of his art purposely was representing that, but he clearly, the iridescent color scheme he uses for his sunflowers and many of his portraits is kind of otherworldly. The colors are like so intense, it's a whole nother level. And anyway, you can wear this futuristic device, and the whole point of it is that you could see what it'd be like, so like you could understand it, because I think it's just really hard for people to conceptualize it. I mean, it's easy for me because I spent so much time around somebody who had the disease, and then I went and studied it, and then had, I was a social worker and I was a jail librarian for many years. So basically, jails and prisons in America have become like the new mental institutions, to be perfectly honest with you. And I think most correction officers might agree to that. Because the people just don't have anywhere to go. They're oftentimes homeless. and they're incarcerated. And that's because they can't usually follow rules or keep jobs or sort of conform to like basic, rules of society, especially in behavior in public. I mean, behavior in public was like a huge nightmare. I'll just say that. But it's strange because in all the times that were terrible, like there would be like random times where my mom would do really well in a restaurant. It's just like the craziest thing. It's like you can't really predict when and where episodes are going to happen. I almost think with like bipolar, it's almost easier because you know when they're going to go through their manic phase. I mean, you can, if you live with them or something, I mean, you would almost map it out on a calendar, like how long between weeks, whatever medications they're on. It follows like kind of a map, but schizophrenia, it's kind of always turned on. There's no like downtime from it where you're more yourself, more like who you were originally before the disease hit. So it's kind of constant, but at the same time, it's like it'll have these ebbs and flows where it's like sometimes they do behave in ways that are fairly reasonable. I mean, there's still obviously something different, but it might not be different enough to be disruptive to a point where they would, have to leave an establishment or like get arrested. But then when it is, like, you can't do anything about it. Like, it's like, there's no lid to put on it. Like, there's no solution, really. And then you can call the police, but what are the police going to do? They're going to lock them up. And the only good thing about jail for people who are mentally ill is, well, one, of course, they get meals and a clean bed to sleep on, even though it's miserable and you're probably sharing a cell with multiple people who will agitate you. But they do really well with the structure. There is something to be said for the role of structured schedule. I'm not sure talking about schizophrenia, but maybe other mental illnesses, it does better. And the main component is like on a forced medicine when they're in a confined environment. There's no like not taking it because they'll be forced to take it if, or they'll be put in solitary confinement. So, I mean, that's a horrible thing to say. Like, these are like good. I mean, like, I'm talking about, you understand, I'm talking about mental illness in America, like praising jails and saying like this is like a good resource. That's terrible, but that is the ugly truth. I mean, if they're on the streets, besides the environment and the weather and, the way they're treated, by people who are not homeless, and just the filth and diseases that are out there and just hunger and drugs and, rapes and stealing and everything that happens to people. It's just a really not mediated environment. Like anything can happen. It's constantly changing. It's constantly in flux, because they're constantly being moved to different encampments. Like they can never stay where they're always, it's not like, this is terrible. It's not like an institution, right? Where it's set. not not saying at all like that is the way that you should imagine is the way that people in these conditions should be treated. You know, in my dream world, there would be, oh my God, there would be so much therapy, art therapy. There would be, you know, gardens for them to just stroll around in. I don't know. It would just be different. It would just be more accepting of what they're dealing with. Because truly, we're talking about things that people are not, it's not like they're going out of their way to bring this upon themselves. This is like the chemistry of their brain. Like, they don't really have a choice. Like, I never knew my mom I never knew her real personality. I mean, it's crazy. It's like the person who gave birth to me, right? Who I was in their belly for that long. I can't say that I ever truly knew them at all. Like, I mean, she was always kind of a stranger because you can't really get to know someone who is that antisocial and who doesn't act. I mean, I'm taking stories from, you know, her parents, her siblings, like friends, like people would show me pictures and tell me stories, but it's like clearly the stories that they were telling me of, you know, the kind of person she was, you know, when she was growing up and as a child, and especially when she was before polio. It's unrecognizable to the experience I had. So I never had to grieve losing her because I simply never knew her. And that may sound really harsh, but I kind of feel like there's a real need for people to have a more honest, open discussion about mental illness and honestly drug addiction, child abuse, like sex trafficking, everything, you know. I think that there's a lot going on in this world that people are uncomfortable talking about, afraid to talk about. They don't have the vocabulary for it. However, many people are dealing with a relative, a spouse. They're dealing with people and like their parents later when they get dementia. I mean, people are dealing with these issues. They're just dealing with them kind of by themselves, because in the 1950s they decided that well, it started the 50s through the 80s, this deinstitutionalization. Hope I'm saying that right. But basically what happened is government decided, hey, we're spending this fortune on keeping people, you know, locked up in, they used to call them insane asylums. Like, let's save money and you know, put them in outpatient care, you know, or send them home to their family or whatever. Like, this is like not economically feasible, and they're not getting better anyway, because, you know, the majority of these cases, people are going to have these illnesses. They're going to have to learn to live with it the rest of their lives. It's not like it's going to go into remission or something. You know, like I said, the only one that kind of does is bipolar, and it's not really remission. It's just some stages of it are much more severe in your behavior and your impulses and how you interact with society, and other stages of it are much more, I guess, more like somebody who doesn't have a severe mental illness. it could maybe just be seen as somebody who has anxiety, right, or depression, but not something that potent of a diagnosis. So the other reason this happened, it started in the 50s, and then it just, by Ronald Reagan, by the time I get to Ronald Reagan, he just took it full force. And what the other issue that caused this to happen is that, okay, in many instances, people were locking people up in their family members, not for the right reasons, not because they wanted them to get help and not hurt anybody or hurt themselves, but simply because they wanted to get rid of, maybe they wanted to get rid of their wife because they wanted to marry somebody else, right? So they signed their wife away to an institution. Same thing with parents. Maybe they have a child. It's very difficult to deal with. Didn't turn out the way they wanted this child to be, how they envisioned it. And sometimes with special needs, that people didn't want to deal with that, they would sign them off to an institution and say that they were mentally ill, they had severe mental illness. And so, like, innocent people were being put in these institutions, and they didn't just sign them away for like 30 days or 90 days. No, these people were like in these institutions for years, sometimes for the rest of their lives. So that's the other reason they changed the laws. The way they made it is, okay, let's say that I'm somebody who has schizophrenia. The way they made the laws, like in the past, my family could go and sign me in and say, I don't know what they had to prove or not prove. I'm sure it was different for however much, I'm sad to say, however much you paid for the care of the person, or if it was state-run facility, if they had money, they didn't have money, all that kind of stuff, and like what the conditions were. So back then, they could just put me away, or a husband, because women didn't have that many rights, honestly, until, they really, the 50s were kind of a turning point. So the other instance would be, I lost my train of thought. Okay, so we're talking about institutions. Okay, let's say I'm schizophrenic. Oh, right, I'm schizophrenic, right. Okay, so in the past, they would have signed me in. I wouldn't have had a choice. They'd medicate me if I was defiant. In some countries, I know in Venezuela they do this, they don't have enough staff to deal with the mentally ill. So they simply chain them up to their beds. There were horrific conditions, 18th, 19th, 20th, early 20th century of what they would do to the mentally ill. One of my favorite books is Jane Eyre. And in Jane Eyre, this man, his wife is mentally ill, and he simply puts her in the attic, and like that's like she lives, it's like a dungeon. And sometimes family members would do that. So for the longest time, people have been, trying to solve this problem, but in mostly taking away people's human rights and putting them in deplorable conditions, pretty much as almost like a punishment for being who they are. And there hasn't been positive therapeutic environments. But it's incredibly complicated. I really did learn this when I was a jail librarian. It's an incredibly complicated, multifaceted, you've got medication, you're talking about therapies that may or may not work, you're talking about, like I said, DNA genetics, you're talking about if they have health issues, because mentally ill people are not going to take their medications or keep up with their fitness or whatever, or they're going to eating, or just all these things that we take for granted. So they end up having, on top of the mental illness, they have these terrible physical problems, because the cardiovascular um, health is one of the number one things. I don't know if that has to do, with like your heart works. I don't think it's that. I think it's just they refuse to take care of themselves. Or, I mean, hygiene's a huge problem, and just basics, and your basic care for yourself is, we really see that with the homeless, and we really see that in institutions like jails and stuff. It's hard to get people to be, like I talked before, to be in the present moment and care about these basic tasks like brushing your teeth. Like in the world they're in, that's not something they need to do. Like, that's not important, So to them, it's just they could even think that like the toothbrush is like an instrument you're trying to hurt them with. I mean, the delusions can be as bad. Auditory hallucinations, which is the voices talking to you, they can be as, often think that there's something in their body, something that is implanted sometimes by like aliens, or the government's tracking them. I mean, there's just all kinds of paranoia. Actually, many of the things that you see with methamphetamine or any hallucinogenics, any kind of drug that invokes paranoia, cocaine, these are all similar symptoms, and that's put a lot of pressure on ERs, because I did work in a hospital in psychiatric care, and that's a huge thing. It's like when people come in, it's like, well, they're seriously disturbed, but is it mental illness or is it drugs? Because drugs wear off, right? Unless you have drug-induced, you can have drug-induced paranoia, but the whole other thing that sometimes, what I'm saying is, like, you can burn your brain out from taking drugs to the point where you actually start acting like someone you actually become mentally ill from the constant jacking up of your whole system, especially your your heart and your I don't know what you call that, your electrical system of your body. So where was I going with? Okay, so now if I was schizophrenic in today's society, here's what would happen. My family would say, okay, she's convinced that the government is putting stuff under our floorboards, and she's taking, tools from, whatever, from a toolbox. I don't know, do people use those anymore? And she's like trying to pry open the floorboards to find whatever the government hid. Okay, that actually could be something that happens to somebody who's mentally ill easily with schizophrenia. And the family member's like, okay, so you have to make them act normal and stop doing this. Like, they have to understand that's not real. Well, here's what they're going to say. They're going to say, okay, unless me, right, the person who's mentally ill, signs himself involuntarily, we can't keep them, overnight. They can go see an outpatient psychiatrist or therapist, or they could go to a day program. Good luck with finding a day program that wants to deal with schizophrenics. So that's going to be a huge problem. You know why? Because most mentally ill people, and especially schizophrenics, are gonna be like, they don't think there's anything wrong with them. They, you know, like we would argue with my mom forever about dental care, or, you know, just taking her high blood pressure medicine so she didn't pass out, you know, or, and have an ambulance have to come to, you know, constant discussions that went nowhere. So she ended up actually having to go to a nursing home in her early 60s, just because her physical health became so deteriorated because she would not do basic care to take care of anything physical. So, you know, she did finally get it institutionalized long term, but it was for her physical health and not her mental health. But ironically, once she was there, she was taking, they make you take mental health antipsychotic drugs on a regular basis, so she actually became more like herself. And then also menopause, I think I talked about that in my other video, oftentimes makes people behave, there's a word for it, something with an R. I'll have to look it up, but it's like some kind of stage where they're actually more cognizant, and it has to do with your hormones. And I mean, I really would like to do some research and find out if men have anything like that, because women do because of their hormones. But I don't know if men have something similar when they're older. All right, so a schizophrenic person, in my opinion, is more than likely not going to sign themselves in to be somewhere where they're going to have rules and regulations where they can't do what they want. Like, they're not allowed to, like, sit around and talk to voices all day. Like, they're not going to like that. It's just not going to be something they're going to do, because they're not, like I said, they're in a different world, right? They're not in your world, okay? So you can explain this to them all day. It doesn't make any difference. They're not going to sign it. They're not going to sign themselves in. There is something, it's called different things in different states, but like a 72-hour hold, a judge could sign. But you would have to prove that they were a danger to themselves or a danger to other people. Schizophrenics, for the most part, I mean, from what I've researched, the suicide thing, I don't want to make an opinion about it. And from what I experienced, like, with dealing with my mom, like, she never ever said anything like that. There was never any intent in that way at all. So I don't know if that was unusual. I kind of feel like schizophrenics, for the most part, tend to die of other diseases that have more to do with, like I said, not taking care of their physical health, or they're homeless, or, you know, their motor vehicle accident. You know, like, there's all the things that, you know, would happen to you if you didn't have basic common sense. You know, like, the whole world would be dangerous, right? It'd be like walking around like being a toddler. All right, so that is kind of the dilemma we find ourselves in. And in America, what they did is they got rid of these institutions, these long-term institutions. I mean, here we have a state hospital, but it's for the whole state. And people in my city forget that, and they're always thinking, like, well, why don't we send these people to the state hospital? It's like, do you understand the waiting list there? And they have a wing for, like, I guess criminally insane. Well, I think they used to. I don't know if they do anymore. That's a whole other story. But it's substantial. Like, to get in there, I don't even know what you have to do. You know, like, Indiana is an enormous state. So the fact that that place is, you know, people are coming from all over the state. Like, I mean, there's no chance your relative in this city here is going to get in there. And then I can't imagine how much priority goes to other places, you know. And it doesn't have, you know, these places, a lot of times they're state run and, you know, they don't have the biggest budget. So I guess I'm going to wrap this up. I'm sure there was other things I wanted to go over, but to be perfectly honest, I'm getting super, super tired. So we will visit this another day. All right. Thanks for listening. Good night.